Rosalind's journey back to the kingdom was nothing short of disastrous. She had endured treacherous mountains, nearly drowned in a raging river, and at one point had been chased by a flock of very aggressive geese. But none of that compared to the shock of what she found upon her return. The palace gates were closed to her. From the shadows, she watched as banners fluttered in the wind. Her banners, but something was wrong. Where once there was the royal crest of her family, now the sigil had been altered. The symbol of her ancestors had been replaced with something new, something unfamiliar. And there, standing on the balcony of the palace, waving graciously to the people, was the peasant girl. Dressed in Rosalind's finest silks, wearing the royal crown as if it had been made for her, she wasn't just pretending anymore. The kingdom had accepted her, and worst of all, nobody seemed to realize she was an imposter. Rosalind stood in the shadows, her heart pounding as she stared at the impossible sight before her. The palace gates were closed to her, the banners had changed, and worst of all, the peasant girl now sat on her throne. It wasn't just a trick anymore. It wasn't a game. The girl she had swapped places with for a single day had done the impossible. She had convinced the entire kingdom that she was the real Princess Rosalind, and nobody seemed to suspect a thing. Rosalind's first instinct was to march through the gates, demand an audience, and declare the truth. But as she took a step forward, the guards, her guards, stood firm, blocking the entrance. Strange. Why were the castle gates locked in the middle of the day? Why were the guards watching the crowd with such nervous expressions? Something was wrong. She ducked into the alley, pressing her back against the stone wall. She needed to think. How had this happened? She had been gone for less than a week. How could a complete stranger fool an entire kingdom? Unless a cold realization settled over her. Magic. She had suspected something was odd from the start. How quickly the peasant girl had agreed to the swap. How confidently she had played her part. But Rosalind had assumed it was simple trickery. Now it was clear. This was planned. And if that was the case, the girl wasn't working alone. The pieces began falling into place. The locked gates, the tense guards, the changed banners. Someone had helped her, someone powerful. But who? Rosalind needed answers, and she knew just where to start. Moving quickly, Rosalind slipped through the streets, keeping to the shadows. The grand halls of the palace had once been her home, but the city itself was where she had truly lived. She knew the hidden paths, the back alleys, the places where secrets were traded like coin. And there was one place where all secrets found their way, eventually, the Rusted Crown. A tavern hidden deep in the lower district, where merchants, thieves, and questionable nobles whispered the kind of truths that never reached the ears of the palace. Rosalind pushed open the doors, stepping inside the dimly lit room. The air was thick with the scent of ale, roasted meat, and the kind of trouble she didn't have time for. She pulled up her hood, scanning the room. She needed someone who knew things, someone who thrived on gossip, and she knew exactly who to ask. At the far end of the tavern, leaning lazily against the bar, sat Garrick, a smuggler, an informant, and, unfortunately, one of the most irritating people Rosalind had ever met. But he was useful. She slid into the seat beside him, tapping a silver coin on the counter. Garrick smirked. "That's a pretty coin," he murmured. "You must want something important." She didn't answer. She just placed another coin beside the first. That got his attention. He leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. "You're not the first person looking for answers," he said. "People have been asking about the new princess. Some say she's a gift from the heavens, a ruler blessed with unnatural wisdom. Others, they say she appeared out of nowhere, and the moment she set foot in the palace, the queen fell ill." Rosalind stiffened. Her mother. She gripped the edge of the counter. "Is she alive?" Garrick gave her a sharp look. "Not for much longer, if the rumors are true." The room seemed to tilt. The weight of everything crashed down on her all at once. She had played a fool's game. A simple act of rebellion had turned into something monstrous. While she had been chasing adventure, a stranger had taken her place. And now, her mother was dying. Rosalind rose from her seat. She had heard enough. Whoever the girl was, whatever she had done, it ended tonight. She was taking back her throne. And if she had to burn down every last lie to do it, so be it. Rosalind didn't sleep that night. She sat by the dying embers of the tavern's hearth, staring into the flickering light, turning over every possibility in her mind. Storming the palace outright would be suicide. The gates were locked, the guards weren't her own, and worse, the people believed the girl on the throne was their rightful princess. But Rosalind had never been one to follow the rules. She pulled the hood tighter over her face and slipped into the city streets. First, she needed weapons. Not just steel, but knowledge. A single sword wouldn't win her back a kingdom, but knowing the cracks in the enemy's armor, that would. She made her way to an old apothecary tucked between two crumbling buildings, its sign worn and faded. Inside, a wrinkled woman glanced up from grinding herbs. Rosalind didn't hesitate. "I need something to put a palace guard to sleep." The old woman didn't ask questions. A few gold coins exchanged hands, and soon, Rosalind had a vial of powder that, when inhaled, would knock a man unconscious within seconds. Now she needed a way in. The palace had been her home for 17 years. She had spent her childhood sneaking away from royal tutors, escaping through forgotten corridors and secret passageways only a handful of people even knew existed. And now, those same paths would be her way back inside. Under the cover of darkness, she moved swiftly through the palace gardens. She had to suppress a bitter laugh. The last time she had walked these paths, she had been planning her adventure. Now she was fighting for her birthright. At the base of the western tower, half buried beneath ivy, was a small hidden doorway. She brushed away the leaves, finding the stone handle. With a deep breath, she pulled. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow passageway curling into darkness. She slipped inside. The palace corridors were eerily silent. Too silent. Where were the guards? Rosalind crept forward, heart hammering. Every hallway, every turn she took, brought her closer to the throne room. And then, finally, she reached the grand double doors leading inside. Light spilled through the cracks, and she could hear voices. She pressed her ear against the wood. "And the queen?" "She won't last the night." A cold, pitiless voice. The false princess. Rosalind's fingers clenched into fists. She had heard enough. With all her strength, she pushed the doors open. They slammed against the stone walls, and the hall froze. There she was. The girl who had stolen her throne sat upon her golden seat, draped in royal silks, her expression one of mock surprise. Around her stood figures cloaked in shadow, their eyes gleaming with something dark and unnatural. Not alone. Rosalind had been right. The girl hadn't done this by herself. Someone else was behind this. The imposter tilted her head, a slow, taunting smile curling her lips. "Well, well," she mused. "The real princess returns. I was wondering when you'd show up." Rosalind's hands twitched toward her belt, where her dagger was hidden. "Get out of my throne!" The girl didn't move. Instead, she gestured to the figures around her. Magicians, warlocks, dark sorcerers. Rosalind knew the stories. Those who had once served the sorcerer king, the very tyrant her ancestors had defeated long ago. "You see," the girl continued, "this kingdom has grown weak. It needed a ruler who understands power. You're not a ruler, you're a thief." A flicker of annoyance crossed the girl's face. "Call it what you want, but soon none of this will matter. Your mother will be dead by morning, and the people will kneel to me." Rosalind's pulse roared in her ears. She couldn't let that happen. It happened in a breath. Rosalind moved first. She flung the sleeping powder into the air, sending it swirling in a glittering cloud. Two guards collapsed instantly. The sorcerers hissed, raising their hands to summon their magic. But Rosalind was already upon them. She drove her dagger into the nearest one, then spun, knocking another unconscious with the hilt. The imposter shouted orders, but it was too late. Rosalind reached the throne in 3 swift strides and slammed the false princess against the gilded seat. "You don't belong here," Rosalind growled. The girl struggled, But Rosalind was stronger. She had trained for years in swordplay, in combat, in survival. And now, it all came down to this moment. She pressed her dagger against the girl's throat. "Who put you here? Who gave you this magic?" The girl's eyes darkened. Then she smiled. "You don't know, do you?" A sudden force blasted Rosalind backward. Magic surged through the room, sending tapestries flying, shattering glass. The imposter rose, her eyes glowing red. And then, the shadows stepped forward. From the darkness behind the throne, a figure emerged. Tall, cloaked, powerful. Rosalind's breath caught in her throat. The Sorcerer King. The stories had said he was dead, that he had been destroyed centuries ago. They had been wrong. Rosalind had no time to think. The Sorcerer King raised a hand, magic crackling at his fingertips. A single spell, and she would be dust. But then, the castle doors burst open. The city had risen. Behind Rosalind, her people stormed inside. Guards who still remained loyal to the true crown, citizens who had heard whispers of treachery, even the palace staff. They had come for her, and at the front, her mother. The queen stood tall, weakened but alive, her gaze locked on the Sorcerer King. "You will not take my daughter," she said, and the heavens trembled at her voice. The battle began. Swords clashed, magic crackled. Rosalind fought with everything she had, cutting through the sorcerers one by one. The false princess lunged at her, but Rosalind was faster. She struck, sending the imposter sprawling. The Sorcerer King roared, but he was outnumbered. Light magic, cast by the queen herself, struck him down. The darkness shattered, and with it, the girl's magic. The illusion faded. The imposter collapsed, her stolen power gone. And just like that, it was over. Morning came, golden light spilling over the kingdom. The people gathered as the rightful princess stepped onto the balcony. Rosalind had spent her life longing for adventure, for something beyond royal life. And yet, she had nearly lost everything. She had learned the price of recklessness, and she had paid it. She met her mother's gaze. "I'm ready," she thought. Not just to rule, but to protect, to lead, to be the queen her people deserved. Because this throne had been fought for, and it would never be stolen again. After reclaiming her place as the rightful princess, Rosalind had expected life to return to normal, or at least what she once thought normal was. But it quickly became apparent that things had changed. For one, the people of the kingdom no longer saw her as the delicate, sheltered royal she once was. Instead, they spoke of her with a mix of awe, fear, and mild confusion. A princess who had stolen a horse, wielded a sword, and insulted a dragon before escaping its clutches was not a princess they had ever imagined. At first, the royal advisors tried to reinstate her previous routine: embroidery lessons, etiquette training, and quiet walks through the palace gardens. But Rosalind could not sit still. After running through forests, charging into danger, and nearly meeting her end more times than she cared to count, the thought of sitting in a parlor discussing the latest fashion trends made her want to scream. Then there were the suitors. Before her adventure, Rosalind had been engaged to Prince Edwin of the neighboring kingdom, a dull and proper young man whose greatest passion was collecting rare teacups. But upon hearing of Rosalind's exploits, Edwin had promptly sent a formal letter dissolving their engagement, citing irreconcilable differences and a deep concern for personal safety. Rosalind had laughed so hard at the letter that she nearly fell out of her chair. But her parents, determined to see their daughter properly wed, began introducing her to every eligible noble in the realm. Unfortunately, most of them fell into one of two categories: those who were terrified of her and those who wanted to test her in combat to prove their worth. The first group barely spoke above a whisper in her presence, as though afraid she might challenge them to a duel at any moment. The second group insisted on accidental sparring matches, which Rosalind always won, sometimes without even trying. One particularly overconfident duke had presented her with a sword as a gift and suggested they playfully duel for entertainment. Rosalind had disarmed him in 3 moves, sent him tumbling into a fountain, and then used the very sword he had gifted her to cut her steak at dinner. He left the palace the next morning, But beyond the tedious formalities of royal life, a more pressing issue loomed. Rosalind had unfinished business with the dragon. The beast had not pursued her after she escaped, but rumors spread that it had been seen lurking in the mountains near the kingdom's borders. Some believed it was plotting revenge. Others whispered that it had merely been intrigued by the princess who had outwitted it. Rosalind, however, suspected that something else was at play. One evening, dressed in simple clothes and armed only with a dagger, Rosalind saddled her old horse, the same one she had stolen in her reckless adventure, and rode toward the mountains. When she reached the dragon's lair, she found it surprisingly quiet. The massive creature was curled up at the entrance, its golden eyes watching her with something almost resembling amusement. To her surprise, the dragon did not attack. Instead, it sighed heavily, sending a gust of warm air in her direction. "You came back," it rumbled, its voice low and thoughtful. "I did not think you would." Rosalind crossed her arms. "Well, you did kidnap me. I had some unfinished business." The dragon snorted. "Kidnapping implies intent. I merely acquired an unexpected guest." Rosalind rolled her eyes. "Semantics." The dragon studied her for a long moment before finally saying, "You intrigue me, little human. You are not like the others." "No, I suppose I'm not," Rosalind admitted. "But I still don't understand why you let me go." The dragon's tail flicked lazily. "Because I was curious to see what you would do next. And because, as much as I enjoy gold and treasure, something tells me you are far more valuable as a story than as a prisoner." Rosalind considered this. "So, what now? Do we fight? Do I challenge you to another battle of wits? Or do I simply return home and pretend none of this happened?" The dragon chuckled, a deep, resonant sound that echoed through the mountains. "Perhaps none of the above. Perhaps you simply visit from time to time, and we exchange tales of the absurdity of human and dragonkind alike." And so, against all odds, Rosalind found herself in the strangest of friendships, with the very beast that had once held her captive. Back at the palace, life continued as usual. The advisors still tried to make her sit through etiquette lessons. The suitors still either fled or challenged her to duels, and her parents still sighed in exasperation at her refusal to behave like a proper princess. But Rosalind had changed, and there was no going back. Some nights, when the palace grew too stifling, she would steal away on horseback, riding toward the mountains where the dragon waited. There, they would sit beneath the stars, one princess, one dragon, and exchange stories of old battles, ridiculous nobles, and the absurdities of fate. And for the first time in her life, Rosalind felt truly free.
If you like this video, then do subscribe to this channel